Hello students, today we shall be taking up the Rattrap by Selma Lagerlof from your class 12 NCERT Flamingo. Selma Lagerlof was a Swedish novelist whose stories have been translated into various languages, and a universal theme runs through all of them. And what is that? It is a belief that the essential goodness in a human being can be awakened through understanding and love. This story, The Rat Trap, is set amidst the mines of Sweden, which is rich in iron ore and which figure large in the history and legends of that particular country. This story, The Rat Trap, is told in the manner of a fairy tale. You should also know, children, Selma Lagerlof was also a recipient of a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1909. Before we go on to read and explain the chapter, it is essential that we know the characters. Peddler or vagabond, as he will be called in the story, is the protagonist. Then there is the old man, or we also call him crofter. Then there is this iron master. Edla Wilmanson is Iron Master's daughter. And then there are minor characters, that is the master blacksmith and his apprentice. Once upon a time, there was a man who went around selling small rat traps of wire. He made them himself at odd moments from the material he got by begging in the stores or at the big farms. But even so, the business was not especially profitable, so he had to resort to both begging and petty thievery to keep body and soul together. Even so, his clothes were in rags, his cheeks were sunken, and hunger gleamed in his eyes. So he had this starved look, and for managing to stay alive, apart from selling these small rat traps of wire, he had to resort to begging and even stealing. No one can imagine how sad and monotonous life can appear to such a vagabond who plods along the road left to his own meditations. Left to his own meditations means that he was all alone, okay? But one day this man had fallen into a line of thought, which really seemed to him entertaining. He had naturally been thinking of his rat traps when suddenly he was struck by the idea that the whole world about him, the whole world with its lands and seas, its cities and villages, was nothing but a big rat trap. It had never existed for any other purpose than to set baits for people. It offered riches and joys, shelter and food, heat and clothing, exactly as the rat trap offered cheese and pork. And as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed in on him, and then everything came to an end. Now, this is extremely very important because this is a philosophy that that the vagabond, he starts this line of thinking, and he has this philosophy, and according to which there was no meaning of the existence of this world. It was nothing but a temptation, just like cheese and pork, which we offer as a bait to catch the rat. So as soon as someone tries to comfort himself with increasing joy, food, shelter, it can be anything, any kind of pleasure, that person traps himself into this rat trap called world. Okay. The world had, of course, never been very kind to him, so it gave him unwanted means unusual, joy to think ill of it in this way. It became a cherished pastime of his during many dreary ploddings. Plod means when you're walking heavily, and dreary is very dull. To think of people he knew who had let themselves be caught in the dangerous snare. Snare means trap, okay, in the dangerous trap, and of others who were still circling around the bait. So, since no one was kind to him, he started thinking ill of all those people. One dark evening, as he was trudging along the road, he caught sight of a little grey cottage by the roadside, and he knocked on the door to ask shelter for the night. Nor was he refused. Instead of the sour faces which ordinarily met him, the owner, who was an old man without wife or child, was happy to get someone to talk to in his loneliness. Immediately he put the porridge pot on the fire and gave him supper, Then he carved off such a big slice from his tobacco roll that it was enough both for the stranger's pipe and his own. Finally, he got out an old pack of cards, played Mjollis, and with his guest, he played this game. He played cards with his guest until bedtime. Now, please understand, the owner was alone, and he did not mind the arrival of Vagabond, and Vagabond was welcomed very happily by him. The old man was just as generous with his confidences. Confidences here would refer to secrets, children, as with his porridge and tobacco. So he was a very good host and he treated the vagabond very nicely. The guest was informed at once that in his days of prosperity, his host had been a crofter. Crofter is a person who works on a rented farm at Ramstow Iron Works and had worked on the land. Now that he was no longer able to do labor, it was his cow which supported him. Yes, that Bossy was extraordinary. She could give milk for the creamery every day, and last month only he had received all of 30 kronor in payment. So this is the currency of Sweden, and Latin word for cow is boss. So that is why he's calling his cow Bossy. Okay. The stranger must have seemed incredulous. Incredulous means unbelieving. For the old man got up and went to the window. So, he thought that the stranger is not believing me. So he got up and he showed him a leather pouch which hung on a nail in the very window frame and picked out three wrinkled 10 kronor bills. These he held up before the eyes of his guest, nodding knowingly, and then stuffed them back into the pouch. So this crofter, this old person, blindly trusted his guest. The next day, both men got up in good season. In good season means they got up quite early. The crofter was in a hurry to milk his cow, and the other man probably thought he should not stay in bed when the head of the house had gotten up. They left the cottage at the same time. The crofter locked the door and put the key in his pocket. The man with the rat trap said goodbye and thank you, and thereupon each went his own way. But half an hour later, the rat trap peddler, peddler is that seller, peddler means seller, stood again before the door. He did not try to get in, however. He only went up to the window, smashed a pane, stuck in his hand, and got hold of the pouch with the 30 kronor. He took the money and thrust it into his own pocket. Then he hung the leather pouch very carefully back at its place and went away. As he walked along with the money in his pocket, he felt quite pleased with his smartness. He realized, of course, that at first he dared not continue on the public highway, but must turn off the road into the woods. So he deviated his path and he went into the jungle. Woods means jungle. During the first hours, this caused him no difficulty. Later in the day, it became worse, for it was a big and confusing forest. You see, in forests, one way leads to the other, children. So it is possible that you will get lost, you will be lost in a big and confusing forest. He tried to be sure to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood, and finally he realized that he had only been walking around in the same part of the forest. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world and the rat trap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by a bait and had been caught. The whole forest, with its trunks and branches, its thickets and fallen logs, closed in upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. So initially, though he was pleased at his smartness, finally he realized that he was too caught in this rat trap. It was late in December, so children, you can imagine it is quite cold. Darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and increased also his gloom and despair. So it is very dark, and he is quite helpless. Finally, he saw no way out and he sank down on the ground. So he sat down. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a hard, regular thumping. There was no doubt as to what that was. He raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from an iron mill. So now he can, he can remember the crofter's words that he worked in an iron mill once. So he can obviously understand that there is an iron mill somewhere nearby. There must be people nearby. He summoned all his strength, he gathered all his courage, and he got up and staggered in the direction of the sound. The Ramstow Iron Works, which was now closed down, they were not so long ago a large plant with smelter, rolling mill, and forge. Now you can see all the word meanings written over there. In the summertime, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slid down the canal which led to a large inland lake, and in the wintertime, the roads near the mill were black from all the coal dust which sifted. Sifted is, sifted is to when it is forming, it's descending lightly, okay, shifting down from the big charcoal crates, okay. During one of the long dark evenings just before Christmas, the mastersmith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace waiting for the pig iron refers to the crude iron, which had been put in the fire to be ready to put on the anvil. Every now and then one of them got up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments, dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom. He wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. So this is a scene in which the iron mill, what is happening inside the Ramstow Iron Works, has been portrayed by the author. All the time there were sounds to be heard in the forge. The big bellows groaned with and the burning coal cracked. The fireboy shoveled charcoal into the maw of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tiled roof. So this is what is happening, and next let's see what happens. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith did not notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge. So the vagabond, the peddler, he entered the forge, and until he stood close up to the furnace, he was not noticed. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light which escaped through the sooty panes. You can see the sooty panes, the meaning is given over there. Window panes which are covered in soot. Soot refers to black powder which is produced when coal is burnt. In this case, it will be coal. And to come in to warm themselves in front of the fire. The blacksmiths glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. Intruder is a person who is coming from outside. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rat traps dangling on his chest. So, this is the physical description of the vagabond. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded a haughty consent without honoring him with a single word. So, he's basically, he was looked down upon, the vagabond. In those days, the Ramstow iron mill was owned by a very prominent iron master whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see that the work was done as well as possible, and at this very moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. So now we will see that the iron master enters this place, okay, enters the forge. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin. Ragamuffin is a person who is in rags, who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. The ironmaster did not follow the example of the blacksmiths, who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. Okay, they did not, look at him. They did not talk to him. But then the ironmaster was a different man. He tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. But of course, it is you, Nils Olof, he said. How you do look. The man with the rat traps had never before seen the ironmaster at Ramstow and did not even know what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. So, Vagabond thinks that the ironmaster might give me some money out of pity, out of sympathy. Therefore, he did not want to undeceive him at once. So he did not want to tell him, the truth. Yes, God knows things have gone downhill. Downhill here refers to worst, okay? That things have become very bad. Things have gone worst with me, he said. You should not have resigned from the regiment, said the ironmaster. Now, you please understand that he is thinking of him. He is thinking of Vagabond as someone else. He mistook the Vagabond as his old friend. Okay? So, this is important for us to understand this. If only I had still been in the service of the time, at the time, I never would have happened. It never would have happened, sorry. Well, now, of course, you will come home with me. To go along up to the manor house. Manor house is a large country house, and be received by the owner like an old regimental comrade. Comrade is colleague. That, however, did not please the tramp. Now, the tramp obviously does not want to go out because he is afraid of being caught. No, I couldn't think of it, he said, looking quite alarmed. He thought of the 30 kroner. To go up to the manor house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into the lion's den. So, voluntarily means on my own, I will be, entering the danger zone. Why should I? He only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forge and then sneak away as conspicuously as possible. So, the main idea was that he wanted to rest because he had been walking, he was tired, he wanted a place to sleep, and all he wanted was to just sleep and then leave very secretly without being noticed by anyone. The ironmaster assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing. Please don't think that I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there, he said. Elizabeth is dead. Elizabeth must have been his wife, children. As you may already have heard, my boys are abroad and there is no one at home except my oldest daughter and myself. We were just saying that it was too bad we didn't have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help me make the Christmas food disappear a little faster. But the stranger said no, and again no, and the ironmaster saw that he must give in. So ironmaster realized that now he must surrender and leave. It looks as though Captain Von Steele preferred to stay with you tonight, Sternstorm, he said to the master blacksmith. So now you must know the name of the master blacksmith also, and turned on his wheel. Okay, please remember the spelling. Sometimes they twist the spellings and ask. Sternsstron. That's the spelling. But he laughed to himself as he went away, and the blacksmith who knew him understood very well that he had not said his last word. So now the vagabond knows that, this fellow is not going to give up. He is going to come again or do something which, will force me to go for to his house for Christmas. It was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of carriage wheels outside the forge, and a new guest came in, but this time it was not the ironmaster. He had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. She entered, followed by a valet. Valet is an attendant, carrying on his arm a big fur coat. She was not at all pretty, but seemed modest and quite shy. In the forge, everything was just as it had been earlier in the evening. The master blacksmith and his apprentice still sat on their bench, and iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of pig iron under his head and his hat pulled down over his eyes. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his hat. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. My name is Edla Wilminson. Now she is Ironmaster's daughter, children, said the young girl. My father came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forge tonight, and then I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I am so sorry, Captain, that you are having such a hard time. She looked at him compassionately with her heavy eyes, and then she noticed that the man was afraid. Either he has stolen something. Now, Edla is a bit suspicious that this gentleman, this fellow, is not a gentleman and he in no way seemed to be educated. So she has this better sense of, she has a better judgment of people than her father. Either he has stolen something or else he has escaped from jail, she thought and added quickly. You may be sure, Captain, that you will be allowed to leave us just as freely as you came. Only please stay with us over Christmas Eve. She said this in such a friendly manner that the rat-trap peddler must have felt confidence in her. So you can see that her persuasive skills are again better than her father. It would never have occurred to me that you would bother with me yourself, miss, he said. I will come at once. So her kind and gentle behavior has, won over this stranger, the peddler, the vagabond, and he accepted the fur coat which the valet handed him with a deep bow, threw it over his rags, and followed the young lady out to the carriage, without granting the astonished blacksmiths so much as a glance. So even the blacksmith and his apprentice is quite shocked to see this. But while he was riding up to the manor house, he had evil forebodings. Forebodings are when you are about to foretell that something bad is going to happen. Evil forebodings. Why the evil did I take that fellow's money, he thought. Now I am sitting in the trap and will never get out of it. The next day was Christmas Eve, and when the ironmaster came into the dining room for breakfast, he probably thought with satisfaction of his old regimental comrade whom he had run across so unexpectedly. First of all, we must see to it that he gets a little flesh on his bones, he said to his daughter. He refers to the ironmaster here, who was busy at the table, and then we must see that he gets something else to do than to run around the country selling rat traps. It is queer. Queer means it is strange that things have gone downhill. Downhill, I told you, worst. With him as badly as that, said the daughter. Last night I did not think there was anything about him to show that he had once been an educated man. So, she expressed her doubts in front of her father also. You must have patience, my little girl, said the father. As soon as he gets clean and dressed up, you will see something different. Last night he was naturally embarrassed. The tramp manners will fall away from him with the tramp clothes. Just as he said this, the door opened and the stranger entered. Yes, now he was truly clean and well dressed. The valet had bathed him, cut his hair, and shaved him. Moreover, he was dressed in a good-looking suit of clothes which belonged to the ironmaster. He wore a white shirt and a starched collar and holed shoes. But although his guest was now so well groomed, the ironmaster did not seem pleased. Now you see what is going to happen, children. He looked at him with puckered brow. He's now, that wrinkled face is there and his eyebrows are all wrinkled. And it was easy to understand. Puckered means uh, wrinkled, okay? And it was easy to understand that when he had seen the strange fellow in the uncertain reflection from the furnace, he might have made a mistake, but that now, when he stood there in broad daylight, it was impossible to mistake him for an old acquaintance. So now he can understand that this is not my comrade. What does this mean? He thundered, so he spoke very loudly. The stranger made no attempt to dissimulate, so the vagabond did not make any attempt to pretend. He saw at once that splendor means that this luxury of mine had come to an end. It is not my fault, sir. I never pretended to be anything but a poor trader, and I pleaded and begged to be allowed to stay in the forge, but no harm has been done. At once I can put on my rags again and go away. Well, said the ironmaster, hesitating a little, it was not quite honest either. You must admit that I should not be surprised if the sheriff would come to have something to say in the matter. The tramp took a step forward, and struck the table with his fist. "Now I am going to tell you, Mr. Ironmaster, how things are," he said. "This whole world is nothing but a big rat trap. All the good things that are offered to you are nothing but cheese rinds and bits of pork, set out to drag a poor fellow into trouble. And if the sheriff comes now and locks me up for this, then you, Mr. Ironmaster, must remember that a day may come when you yourself may want to get a big piece of pork, and then you will get caught in the rat trap." So he discusses and he elaborates his whole philosophy in front of the Ironmaster. Then the Ironmaster began to laugh. "That was not so badly said, my good fellow. Perhaps we should let the sheriff alone on Christmas Eve. But now get out of here as fast as you can." But just as the man was opening the door, the daughter said, "I think he ought to stay with us today. I don't want him to go." And with that she went and closed the door. "What in the world are you doing?" said the father. The daughter stood there quite embarrassed and hardly knew what to answer. That morning she had felt so happy when she thought how homelike and Christmassy she was going to make things for the poor hungry wretch. Wretch means somebody who is unfortunate. She could not get away from the idea all at once, and that was why she had intervened. Interceded means intervened for the vagabond. So Edla, you can see, has a magnanimous heart. She felt it was rude to turn away somebody, who was invited to stay, and that too on a festival, and that too on Christmas. "I am thinking of this stranger here," said the young girl. "He walks and walks the whole year long, and there is probably not a single place in the whole country where he is welcome and can feel at home. Wherever he turns, he is chased away. Always he is afraid of being arrested and cross-examined. I should like to have him enjoy a day of peace with us here, just one in the whole year." The ironmaster mumbled something in his beard. Obviously, the ironmaster is a father. He is not happy with this decision of hers. He could not bring himself to oppose her, but then he could not oppose his daughter. "It was all a mistake, of course," she continued, "but anyway, I don't think we ought to chase away a human being whom we have asked to come here and to whom we have promised Christmas cheer." "You do preach worse than a parson," said the ironmaster. "I only hope you won't have to regret this." The young girl took the stranger by the hand and led him up to the table. "Now sit down and eat," she said, for she could see that her father had given in. Given in means surrendered. The man with the rat trap said not a word. He only sat down and helped himself to the food. Time after time, he looked at the young girl who had interceded for him. Interceded, I'm repeating, intervened. Why had she done it? What could the crazy idea be? So, all this is now troubling the vagabond. After that, Christmas Eve at Ramstor passed just as it always had. The stranger did not cause any trouble because he did nothing but sleep. The whole forenoon he lay on the sofa in one of the guest rooms and slept at one stretch. At noon they woke him up so that he could have his share of the good Christmas fare, but after that he slept again. It seemed as though for many years he had not been able to sleep as quietly and safely as here at Ramstor. In the evening, when the Christmas tree was lighted, they woke him up again, and he stood for a while in the drawing room, blinking as though the candlelight hurt him. But after that he disappeared again. 2 hours later he was aroused once more. He then had to go down into the dining room and eat the Christmas fish and porridge. As soon as they got up from the table, he went around to each one present and said thank you and good night. But when he came to the young girl, she gave him to understand that it was her father's intention that the suit which he wore was to be a Christmas present. He did not have to return it, and if he wanted to spend next Christmas Eve in a place where he could rest in peace and be sure that no evil would befall him, he would be welcomed back again. The man with the rat traps did not answer anything. He only stared at the young girl in boundless amazement. So he is amazed at her words, and therefore he doesn't know what to say. He is completely speechless. The next morning, the ironmaster and his daughter got up in good season. In good season means they got up early to go to the early Christmas service. Their guest was still asleep and they did not disturb him. When at about 10 o'clock they drove back from the church, the young girl sat and hung her head even more dejectedly than usual. At church, she had learned that one of the old crofters of the ironworks had been robbed by a man who went around selling rat traps. Yes, that was a fine fellow you let into the house, said her father. I only wonder how many sweet silver spoons are left in the cupboard by this time. The wagon had hardly stopped at the front steps when the ironmaster asked the valet whether the stranger was still there. He added that he had heard at church that the man was a thief. The valet answered that the fellow had gone and that he had not taken anything with him. On the contrary, he had left behind a little package which Miss Wilmington was to be kind enough to accept as a Christmas present. The young girl opened the package, which was so badly done up that the contents came into view at once. She gave a little cry of joy. She found a small rat trap, and in it lay three wrinkled 10 kroner notes. But that was not all. In the rat trap lay also a letter written in large, jagged characters. Honored and noble miss, since you have been so nice to me all day long, as if I was a captain, I want to be nice to you in return, as if I was a real captain, for I do not want you to be embarrassed at this Christmas season by a thief. But you can give back the money to the old man on the roadside, who has the money pouch hanging on the window frame as a bait for poor wanderers. The rat rat is a Christmas present from a rat who would have been caught in this world's rat trap if he had not been raised to captain, because in that way he got power to clear himself. Written with friendship and high regard, Captain Won't Stay. He raised himself to he was raised on a high pedestal by Edla and her father. So he called himself Captain Wonstead. So, he called himself that because Edla was very kind to him. She let him keep her father's suit as a Christmas gift, and she even told him that if he wanted to spend the next Christmas, then also he is most welcome. So all this goodness of Edla's made him feel like he had been raised to to a high pedestal to captain, and thus he got this power to clear himself. Now, very quickly, I have made a synopsis of the whole chapter, which is quite, not very short. It is quite lengthy. So, anyways, you go through the synopsis, all right? It will help you in getting a better grip over the chapter. So this is how the story starts, that we come across a peddler, and this peddler is leading a very lonely life. He dresses in rags. Then we come across his philosophy of this world is a rat trap. And then one evening he comes across this grey cottage wherein this old crofter invites him. He is kind, he is hospitable, he even entertains him, and he even shares his secrets. But the peddler betrays the crofter and he steals his 30 kroner. And initially, though he is happy, later on he realizes that he himself has been caught in this rat trap. And when he doesn't take the highway because of the fear of being caught, he enters the woods, the jungle. And jungle is not a very fine place because, one road leads to the other, and therefore he got confused, and it's late December, it's cold, darkness increases the danger, and so does his gloom and despair. But then when he hears some hammer strokes, he realizes that there is an iron mill close by. He reaches the iron mill and he goes there, enters the iron mill and sits over there. And then the blacksmith does not entertain him, but he does not even stop him from entering the place. So he enters the forge and he sits over there. And there he lies close to the furnace to warm himself. And then the iron master, who is the owner of the mill, comes. He is very ambitious. He wants to ship out good iron to the market, and this is what he does. He keeps close watch both day and night, and when he sees this ragamuffin, the person who is dressed in rags, he mistakes him to be his old regimental comrade, Captain Wonstale. He even addresses him as Nils Olof, and he is shocked to see him in rags, and he therefore invites him home as he wants to help him. Now, Peddler, obviously, children does not want to go anywhere because he is very cautious. He's very afraid. He's really afraid of being caught. So that fear of being caught is still there. So he declines repeatedly the offer of going to his house, and Iron Man leaves the forge laughing. Then comes Edla, Iron Man's daughter. Edla has more persuasive and convincing skills. She speaks very kindly to him, and she pleads to spend Christmas with them. So she requests him, she pleads that please come and accept the invitation. And then he accepts it, and he feels that now he is trapped again. Now, Edla's observation skills are also good and better perhaps than her father when she tells her father that, the stranger does not look educated at all. He does not look like a captain. And Iron Master assures her that once he takes a bath and once, he cleans himself and cuts his hair and shaves, then he will be fine. But then what happens? Iron Master is shocked when he comes in front of him, the vagabond. He realizes that this is not his comrade, and obviously he understands that he had seen the stranger in dim light, and so he mistook him for somebody else. Now Peddler is unhappy that the whole luxury has come to an end. Splendor means luxury. And then he is ready to change and leave. Iron Master even accuses him of dishonesty, and he threatens to speak to the sheriff, call the sheriff. So when the Iron Master threatens him, the tramp flares up. He gets angry. He tells the Iron Master, and he tells him this whole philosophy of the world being a rat trap. It offers baits in the form of riches and other comforts. Iron Master himself may fall into this rat trap. Then Edla intervenes. She feels it wrong to drive someone away on Christmas. She wants the stranger to stay. She wishes to give the tramp at least one day of peace in the whole year. Iron Master does not want this to happen, but then, he has to give in. Peddler stays at the manor house. He is so tired, he sleeps the whole day, and he thanks everyone for dinner. He is surprised at Edla's goodness, and when she invites him for next Christmas also. So finally, when father and daughter go to church, the truth about the peddler is revealed, and they learn that a man selling rat traps had robbed an old crofter. Edla is extremely hurt and she is disappointed. Iron Master taunts her for trusting the vagabond. But then when they reach home, there is a surprise, for Edla. The valet informs her that the stranger has not taken anything from their house. In fact, he left something for her. She finds a clumsily packed package which contains a rat trap, 3 kroner notes, and a letter for her. Now, this ending is extremely important, okay, children? Especially when we see that the letter that was written by the peddler has been signed in the end as Captain Von Stale. Why has he signed it as Captain? That has been signed as Captain because he has been redeemed. Okay, he had redeemed himself because he was raised to a high pedestal by Edla, and this helped him in clearing his conscience. Now we have reached the conclusion of the story. I hope you all understood the story. So this is the final slide. All human beings are prone to fall into the trap of material benefits. Worldly temptations, they attract people and they fall into a trap. In this case, the peddler also falls into a rat trap. And finally, he is able to redeem himself and free himself from this rat trap through the goodness of Edla. Okay. Now the theme of the story, the rat trap, or if there is a question, say, justify the title rat trap, you must be able to answer it properly. Okay. Like all good things of the world are just baits, the riches and joys, shelter, food, heat, and clothing. And just like the rat trap offered cheese and pork, the world offers temptations, and as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed in on him, and then everything came to an end. And through this metaphor develops the central theme of the rat traps and assists us to comprehend human behavior. The peddler who makes and sells rat traps calls the entire world a rat trap. Worldly temptations attract a person to fall into the trap, and he becomes a victim of it when he is allured to steal. In this case, when the peddler is allured, or he's tempted to steal the 30 kronors of the poor old crofter. Afraid of being caught, then he avoids the highway and he goes into the forest where he is unable to find his way out. The whole forest seemed to close in on him, preventing his escape. It is like an impenetrable prison. The peddler, of course, regrets it, and he, even is afraid now. His inner conflicts, guilt, tension rob him of all his mental peace. He fears being caught and punished any moment. He at one time used to cherish the idea that there were people who had let themselves be caught in the dangerous snare. Snare is the trap, the dangerous rat trap. His false pride, ego that he was free becomes a fallacy. He too is now trapped in this, rat trap. So the peddler redeems himself finally and frees himself from the rat trap of the worldly pleasures and allures. And renunciation of temptation assists in redemption. I'm repeating this: renunciation of temptation assists in redemption. It is an important line, children. So it is the kind and sympathetic treatment that is given to him by Edla Wilkinson that frees him. Okay, that gets him out of this rat trap. Her love and generosity expose another side of the peddler. And at this point emerges the sub theme of the story, that the human being has the tendency to redeem himself from dishonest ways. Everyone has an essential goodness that can be awakened through understanding and love. So, this was the sub theme that runs along with the main theme of the story. Thank you so much. I hope you understood everything. Thank you again.